This is the story of a terrifying demonic entity that passes from person to person, making its victims die with a smile. And the only way to break free from it is something you'd never expect. The film opens in the bedroom of a woman who has recently overdosed. Her young daughter walks in, only to be confronted with the haunting sight of her mother's lifeless body amidst the chaos. Years later in the present, that same daughter, Rose Cotter, is now a therapist going about her daily work. She encounters a disturbed patient named Carl, who frantically mutters about people dying, insisting that his own death is imminent. Rose tries to calm him, but his manic state persists. Soon after, Rose is called in to see a new patient, Laura Weaver. Visibly shaken, Laura recounts a recent traumatic event where she watched her professor bludgeon himself to death. Ever since, she claims, she has been haunted by a malevolent presence that takes on the forms of others. During the session, Laura suddenly spirals into panic. As Rose calls for help, she turns back to find Laura gripping a shard from a broken vase, her face twisted into a chilling grin. In one horrifying motion, Laura slashes her own throat, leaving Rose in shock as help arrives too late. Rose is questioned by detectives, one of them being her ex-boyfriend, Joel. She recounts what she witnessed before later confiding in her boss, Dr. Morgan Desai. At home, Rose tries to find comfort with her fiancé, Trevor, and their cat, Mustache. However, when she and Trevor join her sister Holly and Holly's husband Greg for dinner, Rose's unresolved trauma surfaces. Still shaken by Laura's suicide, she lashes out when Holly criticizes her for forgetting about Holly's son Jackson's upcoming birthday. Rose tries to return to her routine at work, attempting to move forward. She later receives a call from her sister Holly. The two apologize for their earlier fight, and Holly gently reminds Rose to at least get a birthday present for Jackson. While on the phone, Rose glances out the window and, to her horror, sees a figure resembling Laura watching from a distance. Moments later, as she passes Carl's room at the hospital, she finds him wearing the same unsettling grin as Laura. He begins shouting at her over and over, "You're going to die." Rose panics and calls for help, leading to Carl being restrained by the orderlies. Later, when Rose goes shopping for Jackson's gift, she once again encounters a chilling vision of Laura's grinning face. Back home, she notices Mustache is missing, and her unease grows when the security alarm suddenly blares. She gets a call from the alarm company, but instead of help, the voice on the other end is the entity itself, mocking and tormenting her. That weekend, Rose attends Jackson's birthday party, hoping for a sense of normalcy. When Jackson unwraps Rose's gift, meant to be a toy train, the box instead reveals the mutilated corpse of Mustache. The room erupts in panic, while Rose desperately insists she isn't responsible. As chaos unfolds, she sees one of the other mothers flashing the entity's sinister grin. Overwhelmed, Rose stumbles back and crashes through a glass table, leaving her arms badly injured. Rushed to the hospital, Rose receives treatment before being confronted by her boss, Dr. Morgan Desai, who urges her to take time off after hearing about her disturbing breakdown. When Trevor brings her home, Rose tries to explain, but he's convinced she's spiraling into madness, even believing she killed Mustache herself. Later, Rose seeks guidance from her own therapist, Dr. Madeline Northcott, who has helped her cope with her mother's suicide in the past. Rose begins her own investigation into the mystery. She reviews the audio from her session with Laura and notices faint, unsettling breathing in the background. Digging deeper, she researches Laura's professor, Gabriel Munoz, and manages to track down his widow, Victoria. Victoria explains that Gabriel was plagued by terrifying visions in the days following the suicide of a woman named Anna Powell. When Rose admits she's experiencing the same haunting, Victoria takes offense, believing Rose is mocking her grief, and angrily orders her to leave. Desperate, Rose turns to Joel for help despite his hesitation. Together, they discover that Anna Powell died by gouging out her own eyes. Records also show that Anna had witnessed another man's gruesome suicide, captured on gas station security footage, where he flashed a chilling smile before impaling himself right in front of her. Back at home, Rose finds Trevor has called her therapist, Dr. Madeline Northcott, to do a house call, fearing Rose is losing her grip on reality. Furious, Rose accuses Trevor of only caring about his reputation, then storms out, effectively ending their relationship. She later tries reconciling with her sister Holly over the disastrous birthday incident, but Holly refuses, accusing Rose of unraveling just like their mother did. Rose lashes back, saying Holly abandoned their mother, leaving Rose to shoulder the burden of her care. Outside, Rose briefly mistakes Holly for coming after her, only to realize it's the entity tormenting her again. In search of answers, Joel takes Rose to a prison where she meets Robert Talley, the only known survivor of the curse. Robert explains that the entity feeds on trauma, passing itself from one victim to the next after each suicide. The only way to break the cycle, he claims, is to kill someone else, transferring the curse to the witness of that death. When Rose refuses to kill an innocent person, Robert panics, believing she has brought the entity to him. He has to be restrained as Rose realizes just how inescapable the curse may be. Back at home, Rose tries to talk with Dr. Madeline, only to discover too late that it's the entity impersonating her. The false Madeline grins unnaturally and warns Rose that her time is running out. Moments later, the real Madeline calls, confirming Rose's fear that she's being toyed with. Overcome with dread, Rose drives to the hospital armed with a knife. She slips into Carl's room and deliberately provokes him until he has a violent outburst. As Dr. Morgan rushes in, Rose begins stabbing Carl repeatedly, only for Morgan's face to peel away grotesquely as Rose watches in terror. Suddenly, she jolts awake in her car. It was only a nightmare, though the knife still lies beside her when Morgan happens to pass by, intensifying her panic. Rose calls Joel, explaining that she must isolate herself to keep the curse from spreading. She drives to her childhood home, the site of her mother's tragic death. As night falls, the entity manifests as a horrifying, distorted version of her mother, long-haired, smiling, and monstrous. Rose confronts it with all her pent-up rage, blaming her mother for succumbing to her illness and refusing help. The entity mocks her, but Rose sets it ablaze and escapes the burning house. Relieved, she goes to Joel's apartment and insists she finally destroyed it. But Joel's expression twists into a sinister smile as he tells her she can never escape. Once more, Rose wakes, still inside the decrepit house. The entity emerges, tearing its own face apart before forcing Rose's jaw open and climbing inside her body. Moments later, Joel arrives at the house. What he finds is horrifying. Rose dousing herself in kerosene, turning slowly toward him with the entity's twisted grin. Without hesitation, she sets herself alight as Joel watches in helpless terror. The story begins 6 days after the events of the first film, with Joel still haunted by the Smile entity after witnessing Rose's horrific suicide. Desperate to rid himself of the curse, Joel storms into a drug den, holding a dealer at gunpoint and forcing him inside. In front of the dealer's brother, Joel brutally stabs him to death in hopes of passing the entity along. But when the brother retaliates, a shootout breaks out, and Joel fatally wounds him too. Realizing the curse can't be transferred because the next witness died prematurely, Joel spirals into panic. Another dealer, Louis Fregoli, sees everything unfold. Joel flees but is struck by a car in the street, his mangled corpse eerily twisted into the shape of a grotesque smile. The narrative then shifts to pop sensation Sky Riley, who is in the midst of a high-profile interview with Drew Barrymore. Despite her skyrocketing career, Sky battles inner demons, substance abuse, alcoholism, and lingering trauma from a devastating car crash that killed her boyfriend, actor Paul Hudson. Now managed by her controlling mother, Elizabeth, and still estranged from her best friend Gemma, Sky hopes her upcoming tour will mark the beginning of her redemption. After a tense meeting with her manager Darius and assistant Joshua, Sky receives a cryptic message from Louis. Hoping to quietly score Vicodin for lingering back pain, she visits his apartment. But instead of a simple exchange, Louis snaps, holding a sword to her throat, claiming something has been stalking him. Moments later, a horrifying scene unfolds. Louis suddenly reappears from another room, screaming as an unseen force forces itself into his body. A chilling smile spreads across his face before he takes a massive weight plate and smashes his own skull repeatedly, his jaw dangling grotesquely from his face. Shocked and trembling, Sky nearly calls 911 before realizing the scandal she'd face if caught at a drug dealer's home. Sky presses forward with preparations for her highly anticipated tour, though the horrific image of Lewis's death continues to gnaw at her. During a fan meet and greet, things take a disturbing turn when an overzealous admirer named Alfredo grips her tightly during a photo. He whispers that she's beautiful and chillingly adds that he wants to take her skin before security drags him away. Trying to compose herself, Sky continues meeting fans, only to be unsettled again when a young girl flashes the same eerie, unnatural smile she's come to dread. Moments later, she receives an anonymous message asking if she was at Lewis's apartment the night he died. Back at her apartment, Sky hears strange noises. She discovers a t-shirt she had signed for Alfredo, along with a pile of men's clothes scattered across her floor, including soiled underwear. At the end of the dark hallway, she glimpses what looks like Alfredo standing naked, watching her, before charging toward her. Terrified, she bolts to the front door, where she's greeted by Gemma, the estranged best friend she had called earlier, hoping to mend their fractured bond. Shaken, Sky confides in Gemma about the horror at Lewis's apartment. Gemma agrees to stay the night. Later, as they lie in bed, Sky admits that she has always felt an inner darkness, long before the car crash. Gemma coldly responds that it's because Sky is a terrible person. To Sky's horror, Gemma suddenly transforms into the grinning entity, mimicking the honk of a car horn, the same sound from the fatal crash. Sky jolts awake, realizing it was only a nightmare, and finds Gemma calmly making breakfast. Rehearsals for the tour spiral into more chaos when Sky suddenly sees a vision of Paul, her deceased boyfriend, causing her to lose balance and fall. Furious and paranoid, she lashes out at one of her dancers, accusing them of sabotaging her. Later, she storms into her trashed room, immediately blaming her assistant Jonathan for the mess. But Elizabeth reminds her that Jonathan was with her all day. The realization dawns on Sky. She's unraveling, and to everyone else, she's beginning to look truly unhinged. At Darius's insistence, Sky reluctantly attends a high-profile charity event he is hosting. Taking the stage, she begins reading from the teleprompter, but when it glitches, she improvises, her polished speech quickly unraveling into a raw, unfiltered rant about her personal demons. Suddenly, the screen resumes, forcing her to read aloud the name she least expects, Paul. The audience watches in stunned silence as Sky freezes, only to see Paul smiling, walking toward her. Overcome, she shouts at the vision to stop smiling. Snapping back to reality, she realizes the crowd is horrified. An elderly woman approaches to help, but in that moment, Paul reappears, bloodied and grinning, causing Sky to recoil and accidentally shove the woman off the stage and onto a table. Gasps erupt across the room as Sky flees in disgrace. Back home, the harassment escalates. Sky's phone lights up with more anonymous messages. "We know what you've seen. We know what's coming." The sender taunts her with a video Lewis recorded before his death, confessing his torment at the hands of the entity. Then comes an invitation, a chance to meet face to face. Disguised in sunglasses and a hoodie, Sky slips into a bar, where she's approached by Morris, the mystery contact. He reveals that his brother was also claimed by the entity, forced to rip his jaw off with a crowbar. Obsessed, Morris has tracked the chain of victims, piecing together the entity's pattern. He admits he was the one who found Lewis's body and retrieved Sky's number. With grim conviction, Morris proposes a solution. As a nurse, he could stop Sky's heart long enough to break the entity's grip, then revive her before it finishes the job. Horrified, Sky refuses. As she storms out, trying to escape, fans begin to recognize her, closing in like vultures while her panic mounts. Sky tries to find a moment of peace in her apartment, but the silence is shattered when the entity manifests, this time as her own backup dancers, each one grinning manically. They swarm her, chasing her through the rooms until they finally corner her. One thrusts an arm down her throat, and she collapses into blackness. Her mind drifts back to the night of the accident with Paul. Both high on cocaine, their joyride spiraled into chaos when Paul cruelly called her a psycho. Enraged, Sky yanked the wheel, sending the car careening off the road. The wreck was catastrophic. When Sky regained consciousness, her body battered and broken, Paul was already dead. Her screams of grief echoed in the wreckage. Sky jolts awake in a hospital bed, having been found unconscious in her apartment. Elizabeth sits by her side, but the reunion is far from comforting. Sky pleads to cancel the upcoming tour, admitting she isn't well enough to perform. Elizabeth coldly reminds her that canceling could ruin her career and bankrupt them both in lawsuits. When Sky accuses her mother of only caring about money, the entity twists the moment further, appearing to her in Elizabeth's form. Suddenly, Sky sees herself smashing a mirror, stabbing her body with shards, even gouging at her own eye. She bolts for the door in horror, only to realize the bloody shard is in her hand for real, her hospital gown soaked in red. A horrific sight greets her, her mother's lifeless body sprawled before her. Joshua arrives just in time to see the blood, confusion, and fear washing over his face. Sky tries to run, but the staff closes in. In her desperation, she seizes a guard's gun and breaks free, leaving chaos in her wake. Out on the streets, Sky crosses paths with Gemma and frantically forces her driver, at gunpoint, to hand over the car so she can reach Morris. Gemma demands to come along, but mid-ride, Sky's phone rings. On the other end is the real Gemma. The horrifying truth hits her. The entity had been masquerading as her best friend all along. Sky seizes the wheel and narrowly escapes the deception. She finally meets Morris at an abandoned Pizza Hut, where he preps the freezer as part of his plan, slowing her body functions enough to save her from the curse without permanent damage. But as the process begins, Morris steps out, and the entity takes form once again. This time as Sky herself on the night of the accident. It lunges at her, and in a desperate act of defiance, she bites off its thumbs and clutches the knockout syringe. Yet the entity is relentless, overpowering her and locking her inside the freezing chamber. Suddenly, Sky finds herself transported into a nightmare performance. She's on stage at the opening night of her tour, with Elizabeth, Joshua, Darius, and a packed arena of adoring fans watching. From within a grotesque husk of her own body, the entity emerges, its monstrous face and towering form revealed. It crawls into her mouth, consuming her completely. Sky collapses before the stunned crowd, only to rise again, wearing the curse's signature grin. With chilling determination, she smashes her microphone against her head, over and over, until it drives through her eye. The audience screams in terror, powerless as their idol self-destructs under the entity's control.